One other story, I don't want to.
Good. No, we love the stories.
But on that taxes, that included the gas tax. And Roger Mallow, again, an able, highly experienced, headed up the Department of Transportation. He came to the Blaine House for lunch and told me I had to increase the gas tax a couple of cents. I said, Roger, you don't know me. I am not going to increase those taxes for 2 cents. I'm not doing it. I've got a commitment. After I got reelected, in about 1 day, we increased the gas tax 5 cents. I was not under any constraint. But Mallow was stunned. I think he left my administration. He's a good guy. I'm not knocking him. They needed the money. It's like in the federal government. Our infrastructure is going to hell, and these clowns can't increase it. But I made up for it. George Campbell did a good job for me. Sold it in about a day. But I'll never forget that day. You're going to have to do it. Hey, pal, you know who you're dealing with, And I respected him. He was actually, I think, in the same grammar school class as George Mitchell up in Waterville. But you didn't want to, look, that cost George Bush Sr. his election. Read my lips, no new taxes. Then he increased them. You can't dance around that too well. He couldn't say, well, I got a little premium on a six-pack.
So you've just been elected. It's 1978. Jim Longley has been holding forth. And what's on your mind? What are you thinking? You must be excited and a little bit overwhelmed. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's, the people in Maine crazy? No, really, you haven't had that job. Jack Kennedy said it well. Basically, after you get elected president, what do I do now? And your first responsibility is to put together an organization, to put together staff, and to get commissioners. And one of the ironies is, I went to the legislature, and at that time, as a young, kind of liberal guy, if the Chamber of Commerce was for something, we were against it. And if Senate Maine Power was for something, we were against it because didn't think it helped our people. Ironically, a guy named John Maneri, who had been city manager, was the executive director of the Chamber of Commerce. I always respect him, very smart, very able. And I got him to head up my transition team. And we got CMP, a guy who was my chief of staff, very smart, David Flanagan. He later became chairman of the board and CEO of CMP. It's how kind of life goes around.
You had taken a no tax pledge, though, and you're confronted with some real problems. What were they?
Yeah, I told you, I took that tax pledge because the debate was going poorly for me and making a call at the line of scrimmage like a quarterback. I said, I got to do something here. So I just kind of blurted it out. And as I said, I got a good break because I was terrible at the debate. And the only thing they covered in the paper was Brennan's no tax pledge. And then I had to adhere to it. And I did, because some of those, we got around it a little bit. We raised taxes on a six-pack of beer 50 cents, but we called it a premium. I'm not sure the people that purchased the beer felt it was a premium. And we got some hassle about that, but that's the way it works.
What were you looking for as you formed the cabinet and so forth? And you've got a pretty conservative guy, John Maneri, but he's a trusted friend helping you. And you must have an awful lot of people calling you up and saying, "Hey, remember me, Joe? I need this or I need that." You're under a lot of pressure.
Well, I think the first thing I wanted to get people that were smarter than me. That was the easiest part, and that were committed, that believed that government could work. And we did that, and I think we had a stronger group around us as any. You've seen some of them in this room. We have one now, Dick Davies and to Nancy, that were so good and so helpful. And we got really top-flight people. We weren't ashamed to ask, knowing that sometimes you might be rejected. I did likewise with the court. But if you get the ablest people, you respect them for their integrity, it makes life a lot easier. If you appoint someone that's not up to the job, oftentimes the governor has to run there because you don't fire easily because it's tough on the people and their families. It's front page that Jones is sacked in Brennan's administration. So you don't do that. I think you've got to put people in the staff and in certain places extremely carefully, not just quickly. And obviously that issue, do you just get people that work in your campaign? It doesn't mean that should disqualify them. Like Mike Dukakis, a good guy. If you worked in his campaign when he was first governor, you couldn't get a job in the administration. Some of the people that worked in your campaign can be terrific. Mike Petit worked in my campaign. Many others, Flanagan and so forth, they all turned out to be first rate.
Can you talk about some of the other people that ended up in your cabinet?
Well,
people come to mind that people listening to this might like to know. How did you decide on that?
Well, Gordon Wilde would be an example, a very able guy. He had been, I think, second in command of temporarily the McGovern campaign for president, very smart, a PhD, very knowledgeable about finances and energy, and he was one that I think served well. Kevin Kincannon, another able guy, had considerable experience in state government. He later went on to top positions in Iowa, in the state of Washington, and now he's in a very top position in the Department of Agriculture. And, person after person, they had proven themselves in other capacities. And people like Mike Petit, running the Department of Human Services, he was so committed to trying to help children and to get money to assist them that some other commissioners say, Joe, you can't give all the money to Petit. There is a Department of Conservation, and we've got things to do too. But they were passionate, for the most part, about the work that we were doing. And unlike today, they believe that government can do good things, which I happen to believe. A product of the GI Bill, to get my undergraduate to a certain extent in legal education. And how many of us, got guaranteed loans to be able to buy that first house? Generally, the guarantor was the United States government. And we all know some people cannot take care of themselves, not by design, but just the way life works, meaning the hand that they've been dealt. The people that are bond challenged, you've got to take care of them. If you don't, you're not doing your job. And there are a lot of, I believe, I grew up I remember Franklin Roosevelt on the radio. Did I understand the issues? No. But my home, I grew up in an Irish Catholic home. They liked the Pope and they liked Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I don't know who was the better choice for the people. Not that you had to make it, but, Roosevelt got Social Security, supported the Wagner Act that gave workers some right to organize more than they had. Government has done so many good things. Now, it keeps the water pretty much clean. It checks out drugs before they get on the market. These people that beat up in government, they got the joke, I'm from the government, I want to help you. That's nonsense, baloney. The government has helped a lot of people. And philosophically, I believe, maybe sometimes I'd go too far. The Portland Evening Express or the Press Herald once wrote an editorial against me. They were generally good to me, though. They said that Brennan, he thinks another bill, he can cure the common cold. I wasn't quite that extreme, but a government can work. It has worked. It's made life better for millions of people in this country.
What happened to your friends up on Kellogg Street and up on the Hill? What came of them, and how did that influence some of your decisions?
Well, the kids on my street on Kellogg Street, they were terrific. They understood loyalty. Now the word is to have your back. They'd have your back. At that time, most of them went into the military, usually the Navy. It served a few years, went back and raised their families. But I hung around another street corner where some of the kids, there was a proclivity to having drinks, alcohol. And sometimes some of them might run out of alcohol, and they might go into a store and take something that didn't belong to them. And there were little things. They were good people. I was just lucky.
And what came of those people? I mean, and did that have
Well,
an impact on some of your, you know, the least among us? It seems you oftentimes were championing their cause.
well, different things, like on the street I grew up in, the house next door, the present mayor of Portland, Michael Brennan, his father lived there, who went on to the Maine Maritime, be a naval officer and so forth. The next house down, a fellow named Reginald Bartholomew, went to Portland High School and on to college, but he became an ambassador to Lebanon, an ambassador to Italy. In fact, I visited him. I was actually visiting Ray Flynn, the former mayor of Boston, who hosted a dinner for me over in Rome. And I said, who's the ambassador to Italy? He was the ambassador to the Vatican. He says, a guy named Reggie Bartholomew. I said, he grew up next door to me. I went down, met with him, and we talked about every neighborhood, all the nuts, everybody but our own families, you know what I mean, that were in the neighborhood. But there's situated 3 houses in a row that went on to, on this Kellogg Street, that went on to fairly substantial offices. Now, the other area, the kids came from same background. A lot of them were first generation, parents were immigrants, and they worked construction, and good people. Many of them had distinguished military careers.
When you landed as governor, can you think back to then and anything surprise you, like just out of the blue, you had no idea that it was going to be like this, whether it's the food or that you have a guard or a driver or any, you know,
Well,
I'm sure you knew most of those things, but
it was
are there things that come to mind that it's like, whoa, I didn't know this?
It was a contrast. I mean, I grew up in a family of 10, 8 children, my parents, 5 small rooms. My mother did everything, about everything. In the Blaine house, you had a cook, and you had a person or two taking care of the upstairs, a person taking care of the downstairs, an administrative assistant in the Blaine house. You had a couple of troopers there most of the time. It was a little bit different. Usually, in growing up early in life, where police were, I didn't want to be, you know, and they probably felt the same way. But we became quite friendly with them. In fact, I think it's one of the reasons my son went into the Secret Service. He was very friendly with the troopers over the years.
Were you surprised to learn the powers that you had as governor? Or were there any powers that you didn't know that you would have?
There is a lot of power. Just in one instance, for example, you can pardon somebody that's in a prison and they can be out. You know, we've seen that. We saw Clinton do that kind of, I think, mistakenly his last couple of days in office, where he let somebody who jumped bail, you know, a multi-zillionaire, didn't give him pardon. That same power exists in state government. And it actually got me in trouble a little bit in one of my campaigns because I pardoned a lot of kids that had used marijuana or some drug. And somewhere or other, my opponent at that time was able to make it look like I was Mike Dukakis, letting a guy out who was on to rape and murder.
Let's talk about the prison. Thomaston, when you arrived as governor, there were apparently bad things. There were bad things going on within the prison. Can you set that scene for us and what decisions you made concerning the lockdown that occurred?
Well, I had the feeling that, not just a feeling, I believed it, that the state was not in charge of its own prison. Many of the inmates were more in charge, and the weaker ones were being bullied and taken advantage of. Plus, there was a tremendous fire danger up there. You know, they were allowed to do a lot of work, woodwork, and keep materials in their cells that was highly flammable. But the major thing is, I think when you take someone's liberty and you confine them and lock them up in a prison cell, and sometimes out in the yard, and they're taken advantage of and bullied, they can't get up and walk and go someplace else. They are confined by nature. I mean, I think it's very important that if you do things like that, you make sure they're adequately protected. And I happen to believe in the idea that one test of the humaneness of a society is how it treats its inmates. It doesn't get you a lot of votes, but I happen to believe it to be so. So yes, we sent in 100, 150 troopers in the middle of the night to take over the prison. And they were there for some time to remove the dangers, the fire dangers and others. And it was all done without a single injury or a death. And I was conscious of this because I remember reading about Attica in New York when Rockefeller was governor, and other prisons. And the warden that was there then, he resigned. He said, what about the morning after? He was a good guy. He had been a warden in West Virginia or other places, but he didn't want to participate in this. So I got Don Allen, somebody I'd known in corrections for some years. He took charge and did an excellent job. But the principle is, I think I may have mentioned, the United States says 5% of the prisoners, excuse me, can I? We have 20% of the inmates.
Start that whole thing over.
Yeah,
in the United States.
Yeah, we have. The United States has 20% of the inmates in prison in the world. We have 5% of the population, and we just overdo it. Now, I think violent, dangerous people ought to be separated, but a lot of people we could deal with on probation, something similar, but we just don't do it. It's not appealing. Some people go to the legislature and they think they've done something when they get a bill through with a long mandatory sentences. They haven't done anything, for the most part, just probably created more problems.
How did it happen that the lockdown occurred? Do you remember, you hadn't been in office all that long, I guess. Did someone come to you from the Department of Corrections or the state police, or how did you learn about what was going on at the prison? And do you remember sitting down and saying, well, what if there's a riot? What if it is like Attica? What's the downside to this? What's the,
the information I did not get from the state police, but I would have gotten it from the people in the Department of Corrections. They weren't necessarily working day to day in the prison, but people that had overall responsibilities. They knew there was a problem there. And we spent a lot of time, many meetings. We had many so-called experts coming in from out of state to advise me what to do and so forth. But ultimately, we had to make our own decision. And as I said, the warden was opposed to it. So the warden, got through. And to me, a lot of it was the philosophy I went to the governorship with, that we have a responsibility to take care of those we jail, to make sure that they're adequately protected and that dangers, to the extent that we can, should be removed. And it actually worked out. I later met occasionally, once in a while, somebody who was an inmate at that time, and they were very thankful of the action that we took.
Where were you that night?
I was probably in the Blaine house. I was not going into the prison. They had to have the real guys do that.
But you weren't in your office monitoring at 3
no,
a.m.?
But you're just as much in touch in your office. In the Blaine house, you have an office there. They even have telephones. And
really?
No, so we were in touch. No, we knew what was going on from basically minute to minute.
Yeah. Okay, the Indian land claims. Walk us through that as the new governor, and you obviously had been the Attorney General, so what was going on was what you wanted to be going on, I guess.
Well, I think that was the biggest legal issue that this state has ever seen. And, there was 60% of the land base of the state was subject to some clouds on their real estate titles. Even some liberals that would generally be very supportive of the Indians expressed some concern, about their own title. But I was familiar with it, from being in the Attorney General's office. In fact, I met with President Carter's counsel several times on the issue. We met with a lot of people, met with the congressional delegation a number of times. I started out, though, on the basis that the case is based on the 1795 law, almost 200 years ago, that if you did any business with the Indians in regard to land and other things, it had to be approved by the government. And the allegations were that the Indians lost their land without approval of the federal government. And my position had always been, if anything was done wrong, it wasn't the people of the state of Maine, and it wasn't Maine. It was the United States government that failed to act. But I also had a philosophical problem. How do we keep correcting all these wrongdoings? I mean, this nation, notwithstanding the Declaration of Independence and allegations that all men are created equal, we kept people in slavery until the 1860s, and we really denied them many of their rights until the 1960s. It's, I just, I felt the government ought to help people. My brother worked in a factory. We ought to help him and his friends, and so if they need it. But I don't know how we deal with paying somebody off for what might have happened to their great-great-great-great-grandfather. But nonetheless, in the long run, they were well represented. This guy, Tom Tureen, did a superb job for them. Ultimately, the federal government paid them. Now, there were several dealings with that. I think I may have mentioned, but I was at the Metropolitan Club in Washington, D.C., with Senator Muskie, who wanted me to settle and pay $20 million. I wouldn't do it. And Edward Bennett Williams, the most famous lawyer in the country at that time, both trying to press me to settle, but I wouldn't. But the more beautiful thing was, sitting next to me was Governor Longley. And when I was having an argument with these two giants, Longley slipped me a note and said, "Joe, I'll back you all the way." And that was powerful, because Longley was quite popular at that time, very popular.
Were you satisfied with the ultimate outcome?
Well, it actually fulfilled one part of the test I had in my own mind. If anybody did anything wrong, it was the federal government, and then they should pay. So I was satisfied and happy to see the Indians succeed. But I was adamant that the state shouldn't pay anything. The titles ought to be cleared up, as the lawyers in these fancy firms say, "Hey, we got problems with Maine real estate." No, so I was pleased to get it resolved. And these other people weren't, anti-Indian, whether it was Williams or Muskie. They were more operating on the premise that, hey, the exposure here is billions of dollars, and we can get off the hook for 15 or 20 million. Usually in private negotiations, a responsible lawyer would settle for the 15 or 20. But I thought that a government is a higher entity. And, governments will prosecute people, and maybe it costs them several $1,000s to prosecute somebody for drunk driving. Mm-hmm. But this idea that we should settle because of the potential exposure, which is a theory that's used in the private sector, and if we're the private sector, it would have been settled at no time like that. But I think the government has to operate on a higher principle. And you can imagine how these people like to hear me pontificate about the higher principle of government.
Who was on your team counseling you on this?
The lawyer that did the most work in the Attorney General's office was John Patterson. He worked hard. He did an excellent job. He really did. There were other lawyers involved, but most of the work was done right in the Attorney General's office.
Okay. We all remember the gas prices, the Jimmy Carter age, and what was going on. Can you set that, paint that picture for us of what was going on and what you thought a state could do about it, and what you wanted this state to do about it?
Well, it's not only the gas prices. I think there was a shortage. We anticipated a shortage. I know we were even careful about running our little diesel car any place, just so to set the right example. But there was more than the gas. There was the home heating issue back around that time. In fact, my people arranged for me to be on then there were basically 3 stations, the 3 networks in Maine. And actually, I was kind of uncomfortable. I'm going to sit there and address the state of Maine. And we didn't have teleprompters or things of that sort. We had some notes in front of us. But I thought it was important that we address the issue publicly so everybody would have a chance to listen. And we, I think, started some home heating assistance and things of that sort. We all know growing up in Maine, it gets pretty cold in the winter. A lot of people don't have any money. And, you know, not too many oil dealers are going to give you the oil free.
Is there a lot of resistance to that?
I don't think there was a lot of resistance, as I recall, because I think the people understood it. Everybody gets cold the same way, whether you're rich or poor.
Who was it that was on your team in those times talking to you about winterization?
Well, I immediately would talk to the people, you know, within the office. David Flanagan. Dick, were you there then?
No, I was still in the legislature at the time.
Yeah, he was the enemy in the legislature, not really.
Okay. Nuclear energy. We touched on this a little bit yesterday, but let's revisit it. This was also a big deal. Maine Yankee. You talk about that. What was going on, and what was your position on it?
Well, there were a couple of issues. First, the issue of nuclear waste. And the federal government considered someplace around Sebago Lake as a nuclear waste dump. You can imagine that would get people up in arms. In fact, I'd never been at a meeting where people were so fired up, and they had several meetings, public meetings. They filled whatever auditorium they were in. And I was quite moved by a very plain-spoken young person who got up and said, hey, if we don't know what we're going to do with nuclear waste, shouldn't we stop making it? And somewhere or other, that was important to me. And because we had nuclear power plant continuing to make nuclear waste. And, you know, I think all nuclear plants in the country are basically nuclear dumps too. But the idea that we shouldn't keep producing it if we don't know what we're going to do it. And they say the half-life is, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of years. So I took a strong position, and I was supporting the closure of the nuclear power plant. Very difficult because they produce so much energy, and once everything's in place, it becomes relatively inexpensive. Although early in one of my campaigns, I got a message. A former president of the Senate named Bub Reed, he's gone now. He was in the contracting business, probably one of the most highly respected members of the legislature during the time I was in government. And he said, this struck me, it'll cost more to demolish that place than it did to build it. And that made me start to think, what is this, this nuclear waste? But starting from that, and I failed in those referendum, but we were adamant, we were very strong about it. We made use of press conferences and other, available media type things. In fact, I was highly criticized by having a press conference a few days before the vote, but we failed.
You initially supported nuclear power.
Yeah, I did. I mean,
These days you'd be called a flip-flopper.
Yeah, I'm sure. But, I mean, it did make some sense. I mean, they were talking about it. It would be so cheap they wouldn't have to meter it, like some places water was that way. Yeah, it did make sense, but we didn't do the job of preparing the appropriate disposal of nuclear waste. So that's how I got into it. And I think they had 3 referenda, and they all went down by roughly the same margin.
And here we are in 2014, and the nuclear waste still sits at a
I think the waste
plant.
is still up here at the nuclear power plant.
It is.
Yeah.
With armed guards all
But
around.
it also shows the ineptness sometimes of our federal government. I believe in government, but that we can't make that decision. And I have to say that people in Nevada have been well represented. They've been able to block it. And if you fly over Nevada, it seems like as good a place as any. And of course, it's not in my backyard does play a role, but it was absolutely crazy to think they might have something up around Sebago Lake. I mean, it just wasn't going to happen.
The water supply for Greater Portland.
It was crazy. It's crazy.
Talk about environmental initiatives.
Well, in the environmental area, we had a lot of people that had strong reputations in the environmental area. Dick Barringer was one who headed up various departments at times. Dick Anderson, who had headed up the Audubon Society, ran the Department of Conservation. So many of them, and many people that moved to Maine, sometimes with fancy school housing, they kind of want to live here, but they became very committed environmentalists. And because Muskie kind of led an early tradition, he was put on a nothing committee when he was put on it back in the 50s, I guess it was. But environment became a big thing. When I first went to the legislature, if somebody talked about the environment, I said, well, what's he or she talking about? It's weird. You know, it seems strange. I mean, it's not what it is today. You know, people back there were more interested, do we have jobs? Are we taking care of the senior citizens and things of that sort? But environment became a very big thing. And again, I had to be more introduced. I was not in any way an early leader. I was more led than leading.
One of the things I remember so well about you is talking about jobs being the best social service program. Did you come up with that line?
I probably stole it from someplace. Are there any original lines? But I believe it, you know, and growing up in a family, my mother felt to keep the kids out of trouble and hopefully they'd work after school. But it is when people aren't working, not only are they down, sometimes members of their family are down. I mean, I believe it is the best human service program. I recognize that some people, because of frailties of life and challenges they have, you know, physically or mentally, can't do it. But it's so important, and I used to say, everybody ought to have a place to go Monday morning. In fact, recently in my life, I don't have any place to go Monday morning. It's okay for me, though. But it's, you know, as a kid, you go to school Mondays, you know, after summer. And generally, you don't feel so much worth, you know, in yourself. You're not going to a job. So I was, and I also felt the best human service department is the family. And we ought to do what we can to keep families together because it kind of works rather than some bureaucrat or something. Not that they don't do some good things in human services, they do. But jobs and families, very important to make a better life for more people. So I really believed in that whole jobs issue. And if our administration was about anything, it was about jobs too. And every politician talks about it. And once I was in a debate with one of my opponents, and I had considerable time in government. I wasn't governor at the time. And so, what have you done for jobs? And I was kind of, tell me some of the jobs you produced. And I prattled on a little bit about, well, I was a strong supporter of vocational education, and vocational education trains people, you know, so that there's a better trained workforce. But I felt terrible about that particular debate after. But you'll see politicians today, tomorrow, and forevermore talking about jobs that many of them don't have a clue how they're going to do anything about it. Education is certainly helpful, but you've got to spend time trying to lure companies to come here. And when I was here as governor, we got some companies, particularly in the southern part of the state, to come that were into, you know, technical type issues. But a lot of that isn't there anymore. And, you know, when I was first governor, I think I spoke to the people that ran the shoe companies. At that time, there were 22,000 people making shoes. And I had campaigned through these places. People took pride in their work. They really took pride in it. I don't know how many are doing it now because that type of work has gone offshore where it's cheaper. And, you know, we got into the paper industry. Millinocket and East Millinocket used to employ, 3,000 people. I don't know if they have anybody employed in the paper, and it's good paying jobs. So these are challenges that the governor has today, and whoever's governor the next time. I think Maine's got to, one of its strengths is its beautiful place. Its tremendous coastline, the islands, 3,000 lakes and ponds. I think we've got to strongly promote tourism. I know people look at it, hey, that's flipping hamburgers and making beds, but we have to work with what we have going. And we have to continue a strong commitment to higher education and to try to keep people here. It's not new to keep the educated people here. I read General Chamberlain's address when he was governor, and he talked about Maine being a nursery for other states. Kids were born here, raised here, and I think that's how we got Lewiston, Idaho, Portland, Oregon, and all sorts of, but people born here, raised here, had to go on. And it exists today. People would rather stay here. Maine's a pretty good state to live in.
What about Bath Iron Works? What happened to it during your administration?
Well, they had an opportunity, I think, to build a huge number of destroyers. And they needed some expansion. They needed a big dry dock. And we worked very hard because we knew they were good paying jobs. We knew that there was a great history of shipbuilding in this state. And we fought hard to get a bond issue that helped make possible the dry dock. In fact, I recall visiting part of it. I was down to a Red Sox game, Maine Day, one of the little benefits of the governorship. But before I got to Fenway Park, I went through one of these parts of this huge dry dock, which is located, about 400 yards from the house that I grew up in. Maybe a little more, not much. But Bath Iron Works became a bigger employer. It's still a strong employer, but it's not what it was.
Right. The Maine Guarantee Authority, FAME?
Well, the Maine Guarantee Authority, there were, I think, 3 organizations. There was a Veterans Guarantee Authority, and another Guarantee Authority, and a Maine Guarantee Authority. Well, we folded into one and called it the Finance Authority of Maine, FAME. And I think since FAME has been in place, it's been instrumental and a real asset to virtually every economic and development initiative in this state. Consolidating several agencies. The Maine Guarantee Authority got a bad name. It just changed the name was helpful because a guy named Valsing got into sugar beet production up in Aroostook. It just didn't work out. And changing the name, consolidating, more professionalizing it, I think it's been a tremendous success for the state.
How about the home program?
Oh, well, the home program, a lot of that too, from my standpoint, goes back to growing up living in a rent the first 17 or 18 years of my life. And, with somebody living on the second floor, another family, and somebody on the third floor. And I'll never forget, my mother bought a house out another part of town, not an expensive one, probably cost $10,000. And what a feeling it was to go home to that house and the people on the second floor and third floor of my family. So we really felt it, we understood it. We were not of the landed gentry. We were not to the manor born. And I'd like to say biography does inform policy choices. It doesn't mean that you can't be very rich and do good things. Teddy Kennedy did. Jay Rockefeller, whom I served with at the Governor's Conference, they did. But the home, when we moved into that home, I felt I was part of the community, that I was almost as good as other people. And things it meant a lot, psychologically. So I felt deeply about that, and we passed some legislation that raised some money from, we didn't call it a premium this time, but a little more tax on real estate transfers. And the net result is that people could get a lower interest rate, and so many people were able to buy a home that weren't able to buy a home. And that was extremely important. And we had terrific people running that authority. I think initially it was this Sharon Lunner. I don't know where she was, but she did a super job.
You know, you're talking about owning a home and feeling as good as others. It sort of reminds me of the what was going on for people from Ireland who came to this country, and discrimination and stereotypes. And can you talk about that at all? Have you ever felt the victim of some discrimination even? And did you see it as a kid?
Well, I think I'll tell you one little story that may illustrate it. When I finished at Boston College, I spent I looked for a teaching job, before going to law school. I went down to Augusta where they kind of placed teachers, and I spoke to the woman there, Mrs. Arbor, I think her name was. But at any rate, she said, "Hey, we'll get you a job quickly. This is in the morning." And she called back that afternoon. You've had several years of Latin, and so we'll get you a job teaching one of these. You'll get the easy kids. She called back that afternoon and said there's an opening for an English teacher at Oxford High School. You could go up and talk to the superintendent tomorrow. That's in Oxford, Maine, which is only, I guess, about a mile now from the casino. My brother just got out of the Army. My younger brother just got out of the Army the day before he went up with me. And we had an interview in almost a closet with the superintendent, a guy named Harriman. And I said, he wanted to know where I went to school. I said, I went to Chervis Jesuit Catholic School. I went to Boston College, a Jesuit Catholic college. And he wanted to get assurance that I wasn't going up there to try to convert the non-Catholics in the area. It was a stunner to me, because I grew up, where most people were Irish, Italian, and Jewish. I mean, the last thing he had to worry about, frankly, is that I'm going to convert anybody. But that was probably the only time that I felt there was any hint of discrimination. Incidentally, I got hired. I mean, I was only there a semester, and I ultimately went on to something else. But no, I didn't. I know where the Irish need not apply, but where I was, many of the people I dealt with were Irish, so what are you going to do? But that was kind of a shocker to me. I mean, I never had any idea anybody perceived me and my friends who went to parochial schools as kind of somebody who's going out to proselytize.
It is, yeah, it's kind of shocking. I can see
It was a stunner. It really was.
But you got the job.
I did get the job. Probably there wasn't much competition. Probably I was the only one that was in. But it did serve a purpose in some of my campaigns. It gave me a chance to say that I taught English at Oxford. And then I'd continue my speech, and they knew it wasn't the big Oxford in the sky that the Clintons of the world went to.
I don't remember hearing much about this, that you even had a teaching job. Did you do that for how long? Did you say just a semester or just
one semester? Yeah.
And it didn't agree with you, or?
Oh no, I had planned to go to law school anyway.
I'm sorry, say that again?
I had planned to go to law school, just taking some time. I was paid for that semester $1,600 for 18 weeks. And then another thing, we didn't advertise in jobs. I worked for P. Laurelide and Company for a year. They sold cigarettes. That's before it was a felony to sell cigarettes. But it was an experience, in sales and so forth. And when I left this $1,600 for 18 weeks, I think the net of my job with the cigarette company was close to $10,000 a year, which was pretty good then.
How comfortable were you teaching?
Well, I'd never taken a course in teaching. I think I learned more. Like I did what I did at Cheverus. I say we had a Shakespearean play. I'm not sure I really understood the play so well at Cheverus, but I had to study it more if I was going to teach it. I found it interesting. And also at that time, the principal, who was a smart guy, and I think the philosophy is a little different up there than it is today. Some of the kids didn't have any big backgrounds in education. And he said, well, they'll be moving on back to their farm and their family farm. There wasn't the excitement about finishing school. In fact, if I recall, I taught all 4 years of English, and this will illustrate the problem. I think there were roughly 50 kids in the first freshman class, maybe 30 in the sophomore class, 15 or 20 in the junior class, and about 6 in the senior class. Kids just dropped out. So it was a good experience for me for later on when we try to do serious things for education.
And you're selling cigarettes too, in another another life that you don't want to talk about much, I guess.
Well, we never talked about that, but it existed.
Yeah.
But it's also Oxford is about 40 miles or something like that from Portland. And that was, not easy going back. Then I lived up there briefly in the winter because it was awkward to get there, on a snowy day. But it was all in the semester. It was a good background for me. It made me understand education more than telling the story about teaching English at Oxford. It really gave me a feeling.
So how would you describe your relationship with the legislature as a whole when you were in office?
Well, I thought it was going to be easy and they would all get along very well, particularly the Democrats with me, since I had been in the House for 3 terms and deputy floor leader, whatever they called it, for 2, and then I had been the floor leader in the Senate, so I had 8 years. I knew many of the people very well. And your question is, how did I get along? Generally pretty good, but sometimes it was humbling. Sometimes people that I had known so well, I expected them to just do what I asked, and they didn't. And maybe they were right on some occasions. Overall, it was pretty good, maybe even close to very good. And even with some Republicans after a while, particularly in the Senate, they were a little more mature than some of those House members. But, I thought it was a tremendous advantage. And I think one of the important things is maybe even more important than the governor is your staff, in the governor's office. This is a feeling I have. Now, there's a couple staff members here, they may not agree. But sometimes the staff don't hold the legislature in high regard. And sometimes that's sometimes not helpful. In fact, one who was one of my best people dealing with the legislature was a guy named Andy Janelle. He's been a long-time judge since. He came out of Lewiston. He was very deferential, and very respectful of the legislators, and it made him very effective. Now, I'm not talking about Dick Davies not being good with the legislature or Nancy Brennan. They were good. But it is a problem. The legislature can make noise, but much of the power really is in the governorship, as in Washington, it's in the presidency. I mean, they talk about Obama every day. Do they talk about the people in the Congress every day? Not much. You almost have to be a nutcase to get a lot of attention. So overall, it was good. And sometimes, maybe as a governor, we expected more than, I'll give you an example. My friend Jerry Conley, a big supporter of mine, and his 12 kids worked in all my campaigns. He could not have been nicer to me. And I had a bill in it, I think, that would have outlawed radar detectors in cars. I had some feeling that most people couldn't afford it. And why should the people who have all kinds of means have this to try to evade, speed tickets? And surprisingly enough, even though I wanted it, he fought against it, and he was effective. and I did not get a chance to. And that wasn't the only issue. And overall, he's been so good to me, very, very good. There were other issues. We had a representative dealing with a Canadian, particularly the province of Quebec, and there was someone doing the job. He wasn't terribly busy, and he wanted an assistant, and I deleted it. He put it back in the budget. And I said, look, he doesn't have much to do. Does he need somebody to do that not much with him and so forth? I mean, they didn't do things automatically. And Speaker Martin, when I was leaving, and with John Martin, a very able guy, did a great job for his area. When I was leaving the governorship after 8 years, traditionally, they had given the governor his desk. I don't know what the hell I'd do with it. I lived in a small place. But Martin personally deleted it. I think they want to show that they're important too, and they are. And as I said, sometimes I'm probably unfairly criticizing my staff as not being as nice to them. But, the dealing with the legislature is a little like we've all gone to school come June, and you get out of school. Well, with the governorship, the legislature generally went home around June. It was a little like that feeling. Now I can run my office and try to be the chief executive of the state. They're gone home. Don't misunderstand that. I respect them. I understand the process. Sometimes it can be humbling. But overall, they were very, very nice to me. And many people that work with me were former legislators, Harvey Devane, Dick Davies. There were several others so they understood it and they had a rapport.
What was your reaction? And I know you said, well, I got a small place, I don't need the desk, but what's your reaction to something like that from John Martin?
Well,
seriously, I mean, you must.
Yeah,
maybe you can't say it on mic.
No, I've known Johnny. I'm being honest about it. I probably would have asked Chevrolet, my old high school, to take it on. Yeah, my reaction, well, we're all capable of petty things. Some more capable than others. It didn't make any difference. I mean, there was a clerk of the house in Maine before I went there. I think they used to give him all his furniture. I think he had to hire a barn someplace to store it. That was the clerk, not the speaker. I just don't understand. There probably was a reason. It didn't make any sense. Did it bother me for much? Not really. I'm not sure what I would do with it. It's like a lot of things you accumulate over the years. What am I going to do with this?
Your relationship with the legislative leadership overall was good, you would say?
I think,
helpful in getting things
met with them often. And in the Republican leadership, too, was very good with me. And the ultimate test, some years later when I was running for other offices, former leaders like Harry Richardson, I was not governor with him, I was a floor leader on the other side, but supported me for governor, for one of my, I think governor. And I think, who was the president of the Senate? Not Joe Sewell, the other guy from Brewer.
McLeod? McLeod?
Yeah, I think McLeod supported me. No, they were mature. These people, had success in business, and they went to the legislature just, to really, I think, make their own contribution, but they were very mature. It's not like sometimes up here, when I say up in Augusta, it seems like they're at war. I don't think we had any of that. I really don't. No, we didn't. Because I don't think there was a legislative leader that I didn't know very well. Not just in my own party, but in the other party. But sometimes you do things as a governor that you shouldn't do. For example, sometimes you might name somebody to a judgeship from somebody's district, and you didn't talk to that legislator before. And not that they were against the appointment, but I think, understandably so, they feel they were ignored. That's a mistake you can make. And once you make one of them, you don't do that again. Yeah, and the legislature was right and not me.
Who was it on your team who could be blamed for that? You know what I'm saying? I mean,
Well, no,
it's
they were-
like
they
I
were-
want
they were
somebody to
all
protect me when I make
they were-
nominate somebody for a
Well,
judgeship.
you have somebody that handles nominations, but the person that has to be blamed is the governor. He or she makes that decision. And it doesn't take long to invite the legislator into the office, say, I'm thinking about appointing Joe Jones, to a judgeship. What are your thoughts? I mean, you can do that. Most legislators won't complain, but sometimes they will. And sometimes the legislature is busy. They're up there, they're waiting for one committee to act, like appropriations. They got time on their hands. And like the nuns used to say, if you're idle, some troubles develop. They sit around and talk about how could he be so bad? No, you got to be careful. Yeah, you've got to give the I spoke out at Park City, Utah, a new governor's conference after I had been governor for several years. I guess I maybe just got reelected. But Mike Dukakis liked my speech, and that was the theme of the speech was dealing with the legislature, and kind of a humble way that they've got to get the recognition they deserve. Like I'd say to my staff, each senator represents, 35,000 people. It's like if you were at a football game, if you could ever send 35,000 at a football game in Maine, you couldn't. One person is asked to come out in the field to speak on behalf of 35,000, or in the House maybe 6,000 or 7,000. Try to get them to get the message that these people, they're not just them alone. They represent 7,000 or 35,000.
Idleness is the devil's playground. That's what came to my mind when you were talking.
You didn't go to nun school, did you?
No, but I went to catechism class.
Oh, okay.
We had the nuns teaching us plenty. I remember they did a lot of collections in those days, back in would have been the 50s.
Money collections?
Asking the kids for money, to send to orphanages in China.
Oh, yeah.
And to protect the babies
I
from being
think
killed.
No, I was into that issue. Yeah, no, same thing growing up. Yeah, no, that's. Well, I think the Catholic schools. I'm not saying the other schools don't do great, but they kind of emphasized helping others. Now, have some of us tried to help ourselves more than others? Sure, but that's how it goes. But that's that tradition. I'm not saying it doesn't exist in other religions. I'm sure it does, but it's a thing like Catholic guilt. I have it right now. When my wife goes off to work and I don't leave the house, I feel guilty. I get over it though.
What do you do with yourself?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I have an extended family too.
Yeah.
I'm in touch with my daughter and her children. I'm in touch with my son all the time. I still have 4 or 5 siblings living here. I try to stay in some sort of physical shape. I had a little heart proceeding just a few months ago, but I was walking 3 or 4 miles a day. I stay abreast of what's happening in the political world. I yell at the TV set and so forth, all of those things. But,
I know that experience very well, having been a newscaster.
Yeah, well, yeah, but I only left the government a year ago or so. And I spent 21 years in Washington, between Congress, a law firm, and the Maritime Commission.
Do you get together with some of your old cronies?
I see Jerry Conley very often.
What do you do?
I probably won't see him after he sees this show.
What do you guys do?
We go out and have lunch. We don't go out and have a drink. Jerry hasn't had a drink in 60 years. If you saw him and the way he acted, you think he drank a lot, doesn't Maybe, 60 years. No, I see different people.
Yeah.
People live in my building I'm friendly with.
Now, you're a former attorney general, obviously. What was your relationship like with your own attorney general, the person that you had to work with during when you were the governor?
The federal attorney general?
No, up in Augusta when you were the governor.
Well,
Who was
let's
that?
see.
Jim Tierney?
Jim Tierney was there for a while, and Dick Cohen. Dick Cohen was my deputy when I was attorney general, basically ran the criminal division. And Jim Tierney was an able legislator, active in a lot of issues. My relationship was good with him, really. Yeah, no, I don't know Carpenter. I think he came on after I left, Mike Carpenter. So I knew them all quite well. And it had really no problem with them.
What was Carpenter's first name?
Michael, from Holton.
Yeah, I remember him. What's come of him?
I don't know. He served 2 terms in Vietnam, too, didn't he?
Yeah. He's practicing law.
Yeah, he probably practiced law up in Holton. He's from there, yeah.
And you guys had this question about the implication something's going on here. I don't know. Were those relationships with the attorneys general helpful, or did they hurt the work of your administration?
Yeah, I don't recall any issue, really, that we didn't have a good relationship. Cohen, he had been my deputy, and he wasn't political. He was more, professional. In fact, when I got out of law school, I was looking for a job, and I went up to Augusta and met with the Attorney General, just a very informal. He said, well, there's a job over in taxation. A guy named Cohen came up a week ago. I told him he could have it. If he doesn't want it, you can have it. That was far different from when I was Attorney General interviewing people. We had 3 or 4 deputies and inquiring and talking and asked a lot of questions. And one I got a particular kick out of, I won't mention names, a deputy who had gone to one of these elite prep schools, and someone came in the office with a terrific pedigree in regard to his formal education. After he left, this one who had gone to an elite prep school said he's too preppy. I got a kick out of that. But, it takes one to know one. But I was fortunate, excellent people, in my opinion, in the Attorney General's office.
Did you take that job in taxation?
No, I did not. And
Who
it
was the
wasn't
Attorney
open.
General then?
I think it was Frank Hancock. Yeah. No, I did not. I came back here. I wouldn't have been happy driving to Augusta, but, when you get out of law school, you want to do something. So I was offered a job by Charlie Smith in Saukville. He was the best-known lawyer there. And he said, yeah, we can't pay Wall Street prices, not that my services would be worth them. He offered me a job at $100 a week. And I said to myself after, I don't want to go to Saukville. I'm a Portland guy. Really. And I started basically on my own with this guy, Casper Tavanian.
Let's talk about President Reagan. What are your thoughts about President Reagan?
Well, I kind of, I respect him and so forth, but when Reagan was there, I used to have some lines I'd speak about, and I'm not sure Reagan would like them. But I thought his administration was fighting for an objective that those who had a lot would get more, and those who had little would get less. And to me, it didn't square with social justice or economic justice. And I was stunned that he got elected president, absolutely stunned. I couldn't believe it was going to happen. But that maybe reflected how out of touch I was. Even though I supported Teddy Kennedy against Jimmy Carter, I thought Carter was very smart, and he was. But as Teddy Kennedy would say, he charged up the hill and he charged right down again, just generally talking about issues. So Reagan, I consider him an actor. I didn't rate him B as some of the cynics did, as a B actor. He's fine. But he obviously actually had some relatives that voted for him. I couldn't believe it. I still talk to them after, but not with the same enthusiasm. They become You can get people that grow up in ethnic backgrounds that struggled, that made something of themselves, and all of a sudden they kind of think like a Republican.
But you're saying you were kind of shocked that he was elected, and yet people like you weren't supporting Jimmy Carter.
Well, that was Jimmy Carter after he was running for re-election. I supported Carter when he first ran. I voted for him anyway.
Right.
But when he ran for re-election, he didn't seem to have the fire that I would like to see. I think Kennedy had more of that. But I respected Carter. I thought Carter was a very bright guy. He may have been a peanut farmer, and he may have tried to sell himself as a nuclear engineer, He was on a nuclear sub. But he was smart. I watched him. I dealt with him a number of times.
And what about community block grants and the like that you implemented block grants and community development?
Well, you got money, from the federal government, and you could make some of the choices what, government service would be funded. I think most governors like that. Most governors like as much discretion as possible with resources coming from the federal government. And the beauty is you don't have to pass a tax bill to get the money. It's kind of nice when another governmental entity does it and sends the dough, and you have influence of distribution. That's kind of the best of all worlds.
And that happened under Reagan.
I don't know. Reagan may have had that yet. It doesn't. Notwithstanding that, philosophically, the Reagan people weren't concerned with the people I was concerned with. That's how I got into that concept of those who have a lot should get more, those who have little should get less. And Reagan was always talking about the African-American woman or something who was driving a big Cadillac up to the store with and getting using food stamps or something, symbolically. I didn't buy that a bit. Most of the people in those areas, they'd like to live in the big house on the hill. They'd like to have a lot of things. A lot of them have been kept down. They didn't have a chance. That's my view.
The relationship between local government and the federal government, the relationship between state government and local government is a topic that these guys have suggested you might.
Well, I think we put together a group composed of people who are serving in local government, as city council, as selectman. And that was very helpful to hear their concerns. Not that you had to hear them, not to understand them. Generally, they wanted more money from the state government. They didn't want revenue sharing cut. They wanted it increased. And that's all understandable. But I admire and respect the people at the local government. I've often felt that the average citizen has a better idea what the Portland City Council is doing than they did when I first went to the legislature. There were 11 state reps from Portland, and I think 3 senators. Just like I think they maybe had a more understanding what the state legislature was doing than they did what the Congress was doing. I mean, it was the government closest to the people. If they had a pothole, they didn't go see the state rep as a rule. They'd probably see the city councilor if they were going to complain of something. And I know this sounds a little Republican-ish, government close to the people, but it's true in a sense. But a lot of local governments weren't. They're under great pressure not to increase the property tax, and that's basically what they had going to fund their government.
What is it, all politics is local? Somebody said that?
Tip O'Neill said all politics is local. And there's some truth in that. How does it affect me? Just like when I'd have programs and I'd see some people have done pretty well, like, well, what about me, Joe? I might have been considered a redistributor of the wealth. And we have that now, but we're redistributing it up to the top to the 100th of 1%, in this whole issue of income equality. In effect, the average worker with inflation-adjusted dollars, their pay hasn't been increased in 5 years. The people at the very top is probably quadrupled.
Yep.
It's unbelievable.
And they park their yachts so you can't see out the window at DeMillo's. So.
Well, we were down there yesterday, right? You saw the size of that yacht. And then that, what's his name, Geffen, the big Hollywood guy, his was parked in at Union and at the State Pier last year for about 3 weeks. And I think it cost either 100 million or 200. I mean, over 100 million. I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot compared to a lot of our little rowboats.
Yeah. George Campbell was an advisor to you during this time, and he assisted in the areas of revenue sharing and increasing aid to education.
Particularly dealing with transportation and economic development. George was a star. He had been a town manager in Greenville and another little town up in Kennebec County, I think, and a third town. He had a lot of experience with local government, but he is very able. He's relatively, I guess the word is diminutive, but he's relatively short. He could be 5'6" on a great day, and there could be a wall 20 feet high. He would get over it. And one example of his effectiveness, I had a situation where I think I mentioned that Roger Mallor wanted me to increase the gas tax, and I had that overhanging, no tax increase pledge. And once I got reelected, George led the fight in a day or so to increase the gas tax 5 cents. We were no cheapskates. We weren't fooling around with a penny or two. He also was very creative, I think, in trying to get some of the money, I think, from the Maine Turnpike Authority to help local towns, you know, where those towns are along that road. But Campbell, very able, a star, but he always has to move on to something else. But he did great service for us.
Aid to education, you were supportive of increasing it and did so?
Yeah, I think the law that was passed, I don't know, 10 years before I got there was good, you know, that the state was picking up a larger and larger share. I think we were headed for something in the 60s. I don't know if they've achieved that, because the local governments, they have to rely on the property tax. It's tough. Sometimes you can have a nice home, but you don't have very little income coming in. And then the government, and this is a great credit to Ken Curtis, you know, who led the fight for the income tax. And income tax plus the sales tax, it gave the state revenue generating that the local government doesn't have. And I think it's appropriate that the state helps out, and particularly in education. And I think now, I'm not sure of the exact number, but it's probably in the 60s, you know, the cost of local education. And if they don't, you know, as I said, I taught one semester $1,600 for 18 weeks. And that wasn't the lowest 20%. That was probably in the 30%. It was 30% lower. I think while I was governor, we kind of passed a bill that called for a minimum salary of about $17,000 for teachers. And one thing I did for teachers, we had 1 year that money was coming in pretty well. So the teachers were always talking about being underpaid, and truly they are, and they were then. But we did something kind of unique. We sent 2 checks to the teachers, 1,000, I think, in December, 1,000 in March, to every teacher in the state. And until very recently, I'd see teachers and retired teachers, how much they appreciate that. What I was trying to say, that we're not just going to talk about doing something. We're going to do something strange. We're going to actually do it and send them cash.
You got reelected in 1982. Can you take us back to that time and talk about the numbers and how was it possible that you did so well?
Well, at first I was surprised how well it did go. Larry Spiegel, I think, then the communications person, great guy, died very young. He came into my office and he said, "Joe, you won every single county." And yeah, I mean, that was kind of stunning to me. I even won Cape Elizabeth and Falmouth. They generally weren't people that were, my type of persuasion. But I think it reflected, first, you're the incumbent, you have a terrific advantage. Secondly, we had very able people, that did a good job, and we did things that we said we were going to try to do when we were running for the office. But I honestly, and I'm not trying to be just generous and kind, the fact that I had such a strong staff and strong commissioners that believed in government, and they carried me to I think it's as big a win as the state has seen in modern history.
What was it, 62%?
Yeah.
And who were you up against back then?
Charlie Cragen.
Oh, okay.
Well, Charlie was smart. He finished first in his class and first in the bar exam. And I'd known Charlie. Actually, I saw him a few times when I worked in Washington. He was on the appeals board for the veterans, but he had been a lobbyist representing the Maine Medical Center on a lot of those. He was very active.
Okay.
But the incumbent has a tremendous advantage. It really does. I mean, how do you think? When I was in Congress, the year I got reelected, I think 98% of those who sought reelection got reelected. Did they deserve it? Absolutely not.
Right.
Now, a few years after that, when I was on the Federal Maritime Commission, I think it was 98.5%. I mean, they used to talk about the parliament over in Russia, where at that time I think they were appointed. The chances you do as well as they did in Russia where they were appointed.
You accomplished a lot in your second term. Is that because you felt you had a mandate to work with?
I think that helped, but I think I knew more. You learn a lot in so many of these jobs, whether it's Congress or governor. You learn more about what is possible, and you learn more about how to make the possible happen. And your staff and your commissioners, most of the same ones, stayed there. And incidentally, I didn't mention Rodney Scribner, who was the financial genius we had. He was pretty humble and kind of guy that could do something on the back of an envelope, but he was pretty right and kept us not only out of financial trouble, we improved the state's credit rating. That is unbelievable for a Democrat. In fact, I suppose my Democratic credentials, could have been questioned. Sometimes people think that Democrats are very generous with other people's money.
So I've heard that, yes.
Right on.
The economy was getting better as well during these times?
Yeah, I don't remember the exact numbers, but some of those years that I was there was not good. Unemployment was high across the country. I think it could have been as high as 10%. There were some years that we struggled.
Okay. And you hadn't taken the no tax pledge?
Not the second time, no.
Not the second time.
I tell you, that was a call at the line of scrimmage. You don't do that too often. It was trying to make something good out of a bad performance.
Back onto that call, when you made that call of no taxes, did you take a lot of flack for that from the people who were your advisors?
No, I suppose a lot of them didn't believe it. But as I said, an example of, a very competent government guy, Malla, who said, no, you're going to increase it. Then you knew who was governor and who worked in the administration. No, I'm not going to destroy my credibility for 2 cents. A little more, maybe I'd consider it.
Governor Council. That was a way of running the government and overseeing the work of the governor, and that council was abolished during your time.
Yeah, it was abolished the year before I took over. So when I came in, there was no governor's council. It was part of the Democratic Party religion to get rid of it. And it was interesting that they had some Democrats on it. And once they served on it, they thought it was useful. It was no part of their religion anymore. But they still have it in Massachusetts to a certain extent. But they, I think, confirmed judicial appointments, and they actually had to have their vote for pardons too. As a young lawyer, I was up there arguing for a pardon before the governor and the council, and they played a role. But I think historically it was part of don't let the executive have too much power. That's it. It was really limiting it had to be a lot of checks on the executive. And some people like that idea.
Yeah.
Depends who's
what about
there.
you?
I liked it better without the council. And it seemed, and it was kind of strange. I think the council had certain privileges that they could give insurance coverage to the extent the state bought it, to their local insurance person. It's
What?
yeah. You got to look at the history. It's strange, but the interesting thing to me is the Democrats, when they had a Democratic council, I think as a result of the Goldwater year, they thought it was not such a bad idea. They thought their work was. In fact, my friend Dave Brennan, I think, was on it, and Carl Cinquetto, the well-known Cinquetto, good guy, gone to a long time now.
Okay, let's go back to education. You restructured elementary, secondary education, instituted the main education assessment, raising teacher pay, increasing state aid. You gave a new focus to the university system. I'll give you a softball question. Why was education so important to you?
It's all because I taught at Oxford. No, but we all, and it's something we really all have in common. We've all gone to school, and I think we all have an appreciation at different levels of education. And my experience at Oxford was, as I like to say, biography informs policy. I thought we could do better. I really did. And it's not just me. We created a commission. I think we had the president of Brandeis College, the president of Colby College, Sidney Werner, who was a PhD before at the law school, a very prominent figure in Maine, and several other very able people, to look into it, to make recommendations. And education, it's been, I think, at the top of the list of governors for years, and it will continue to be. It's particularly public education, even though I went to a private school, but it didn't cost anything. Although a grandnephew of mine goes to Cheverus, and I think it's $16,000. It was zero when I went there. And education's gotten so expensive, it's crazy. Even Boston College, which is a hard school to get into now, my tuition was $500. When I was getting a GI Bill of $110 a month or $990 for the year, I could pay for it even though I worked all the time. I think I may have mentioned I worked in a place in Boston. They always gave me a mop, a broom, and a buffer. That's how highly they thought of my talent.
Now, you used, or commissions were employed by you to give you advice. What did you think of commissions, and why weren't you concerned that the commission might not vote for something or might endorse something different from what you want?
I didn't have the slightest concern there. I was able to get, as I said, the former president of Brandeis, the former president, maybe the active president of Colby, and several people that had distinguished reputations. And I think they were all people of integrity. I was willing to accept what their recommendations were. And somewhere or other, it just came out of a political office. I think people don't weigh it as heavily. But if you get a commission of highly respected people that they didn't know me anything, I didn't know them anything, they were just giving their best judgment. I think it's a very effective way of getting people involved. Once they're involved, they're really into it. And clearly, a lot of them knew a hell of a lot more about education than I did.
Early in your political career, you were anti-abortion. You want to talk about that? You had a change of heart, or how did that come about?
Well, I grew up in a Catholic tradition, as they say in Northern Ireland. And I grew up in the Catholic Church, and that's how I grew up. And I'm still not excited about abortion, to be honest with you, but I was very impressed with the speech that Mario Cuomo gave out at the University of Notre Dame. And he was against abortion, but he said it so eloquently, that's my decision, but let other people make their own decision. I'm still not a fan of abortion, but I'm pro-choice. Let them make the decision. In fact, I talked to some of my friends who are vegans, and they don't feel it's right to kill animals and so forth, and I'll say to them, well, how do you feel about abortion? And they have a little problem, and I remember people being in my congressional office, young women that were very active in this. I said, well, when do you think it should be prohibited? How about the week before the person's to deliver? They never gave me much of an answer. So yes, I know the current word is to say you evolved, but I hadn't thought about it too much. I just thought it was wrong. But then I had to think about, how other people feel, and it's not for me to dictate their choice. And so I think that it makes sense where it stands right now.
And is that the result of politics, or is it the result of personal, or is it a little bit of both?
Well, I think it was more personal that I grew up, when you go to Catholic schools, Catholic grammar school, Catholic high school, Catholic college, I didn't go to a non-Catholic school until I went to law school. We didn't have a lot of talk about abortion there. I mean, law schools are more like trade schools in a sense. You'll learn a little bit about the law, hopefully. But you do learn, and you do evolve, or you do grow. And as I said, I'm still not excited about abortion, but I voted pro-choice, and I'm not going back to vote any place. No one would have me. But if I did, I would still vote pro-choice.
We talked earlier about the concept that there were some fears that back when you were applying up in Oxford for a teaching job, that somehow the Catholic Church might have some influence on what you did. Did anyone in the Catholic Church at the time that when you changed, did anybody ever talk to you, like the bishop or anybody ever asked to speak to you and say, listen, I'd like you to sit down and talk to me about this?
I think a couple of bishops said they couldn't support me. In the irony, they supported my opponent, who was pro-choice. No, they did. Most of the parish priests were fine. In fact, in my view, they're much more understanding of real life. A lot of the bishops, the hierarchy, they're almost like Republicans. They were quite excited about, but the parish priests were really good in understanding. But I think at least 2 bishops said they couldn't support me, and they were disappointed. That's the way it was.
Okay. Are there other social issues that you changed your feelings about over time?
I think gay rights would be an interesting issue. I think in 1974, I was running for governor, and I was up at the University of Maine, and I was speaking to a group of students, and someone raised this issue about gay rights. It's like I said earlier in my career in the early 60s, environment was a strange word to me. I know what it's become. But gay rights, I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know I think we knew about 2 gay people in Maine. When I was in the Army, I don't ever remember meeting a gay person. But I was stunned by the question. you know, where I was on gay rights. I mean, it just got no attention. If that had gone to the legislature then, it would have been defeated 98-2 or something like that. So, but there's an issue that obviously things have changed. I wasn't against anything, but there was never anything to vote on, you know, dealing. It just an issue that I didn't grow up with. And I think America, though, and I believe people don't choose that. It's just the way they're wired, and I respect that.
Are there other examples of social issues that you've changed your feelings
I didn't
on?
actually change that. There was no chance to vote. I was more stunned than anything else.
Initially, there was like,
Yeah.
why would anybody even be talking about it?
Yeah.
And I get that.
Yeah, but I honestly felt that gay people, and in retrospect, were treated very unfairly. I mean, I remember one case, there was a person that was openly gay and everybody knew. This is only a couple, and he had a beautiful sister. And I wasn't terribly interested in trying to date her. Not that she'd date me anyway, but it was bad. I mean, they weren't treated fairly. And I think we've grown up, and it's to the credit of the people in this state and so much across the country.
How about women's issues? Any evolution on your part on that, or human rights types issues?
The big women's issue really was abortion, I guess, later on. But, you know, when I started practicing law, I don't think there were 5 women lawyers in the state. Now I think over half the law school is women. It's a little like medical schools. Over half the medical schools now, I think, are women, just the way things developed. I mean, I think I appointed the first woman lawyer to the Superior Court, to the Supreme Court, to the Workers' Compensation Committee. In fact, I appointed Carolyn Glassman, I think, who passed away recently, first woman on the Supreme Court. And Jessie, forget her last name, was the first woman on the Superior Court. And I appointed several women to the Workers' Compensation Commission.
Are there other social issues that come to your minds that we should talk about?
During your terms in office, I can't think of anything specific.
He sort of came in with this.
But the gay issue is interesting. I mean, this isn't, it's 26, that's about 40 years ago, you know, being raised at your university, Dick. Dick may have been the guy that raised the question, I don't know. But it was a stunner to me. I'm going up there to talk about jobs and all the rest of this stuff. This guy's asking this question about gay rights. And I said, what the hell is he talking about? You know, it just, the world is different. The country is different. The state is different. In the abortion issue, Catholic legislators, if I supported some little bit of a, you know, choice thing at that time, several of them chastised me. I don't remember exactly what it was, but, you know, there was one member of the legislature, a good guy, but he was like the defender of the church. His name was Quinn. And I think he was much my senior, probably 30, 40 years older. But he'd get up, and if there was any encroachment, you know, against right to life, like probably the real bishop or cardinal, good guy, but they felt very strongly. And I forget what the issue, there was an issue that wasn't the full pro-choice that I support for, and several, they were actually Irish Catholic background, were very critical, and I don't think they supported me when I ran for governor.
So you took on some tough issues, seat belts, drunk driving laws, those things weren't real popular.
Well, on the drunk driving, I put through legislation that required a mandatory jail sentence if you were convicted of drunk driving. It might have been 2 days. And there were people I'd known, acquaintances and friends that owned bars. They didn't like that one bit. But, you know, the statistics are overwhelming, at least at that time. Well over half of the fatalities, alcohol was involved. And I said, we ought to do something about that. In fact, I'm not so sure we wouldn't be better off if we did what the Scandinavian countries, I understand, do. No drinking after driving. It's a crime. And we actually did that for kids. I think if you're under 21, I'm not sure. If you're stopped, maybe under 18, and you have any measurable amount of alcohol in your blood, you lose your license. And this is a thing that you can do in government that's good, doesn't cost a cent. And as governor, I'd be with the state troopers, and I'd ask, what do you see? He said the kids are still drinking, but they're in the back seat. They weren't driving. And no one loved it more than parents. And they could speak to the kids, you know, you're going to lose your license for a couple of years. And the license is their life at a certain age, particularly in the rural areas. And I don't know if that's still a law. I don't know if it's been adopted by many other states. I was invited to speak in California and a few other places on that issue after I left the governorship.
What about seatbelts?
I was a nutcase for seatbelts. In fact, I testified before the committee. You know, I just think the statistics were clear that you reduce injuries, and the state has an interest because a lot of people have no insurance. They're going to be taken care of, and the government, federal or state, is going to be paying. So I was very strong supporter for seatbelts and also helmets for motorcyclists. And they were not in love with me. Jock McKernan, I think, wanted to repeal that if we ever passed it, and they supported them. But if you're on a motorcycle all the time, a good many of them are going to hit the ground. And it's a lot better if you have some protection. And a lot of them are not going to have insurance. Again, the state's interest, you know, that money would be diverted from other causes. So I'm still for seatbelts. I'm still for helmets. And I guess that's not the law anymore.
Workers' comp was a problem with your union friends?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, in Maine at the time, the costs were getting out of control. Something had to be done. I actually discussed it with a guy named Tony Earl at a governor's conference. He was then the governor of Wisconsin. He said, take it on, take it on. He gave me a lot of encouragement. But one of the real reasons, and the workers' comp lawyers were big supporters of mine, yeah, they also represented the unions. But there was a provision that the lawyer got paid even if he had no case, or she had no case. They got paid. So there was a lot of incentive to file claims. But they were quite angry at me, but I said, that's nuts. We got to do something about that. We took it on, and we took some heat, you know, from the lawyers and so, but that's part of the game. And we're very proud of that.
And you took it on basically because you felt it was the right thing to do, and even though you were going to be
Hey, look, I'm not good at Mr. Goody Two-Shoes, but it was the right thing to do. And I never felt uncomfortable as long as intellectually I thought it was the right thing, and particularly in the second term.
Now, you were called, and you are philosophically a liberal, and yet during your terms, you were pretty tight with the money, the purse. Can you talk about that?
I wasn't so much tight with the money, but I believed that you shouldn't spend more than you take in. And our credit rating had been lowered in some prior administrations. And I was trying to prove the credibility of Democrats could be fiscally responsible. And I worked at it, and I got the credit rating upgraded. It was not easy, but we were very careful. Of course, you have a lot of help in state governments. Most states, probably nearly all but one or so, have a constitutional provision, you know, that you've got to balance your budget. But we did more than that. We were down in Wall Street talking with the people at the rating agencies, and they were pretty picayune about a lot of things then. They obviously weren't very picayune about much of anything. 10 or 15 years ago, they were giving high grades to junk bonds and the rest of that. But we did it. It happened. Credit rating got upgraded. We showed that a Democrat could act fiscally responsible.
How about health costs and controls?
Well, we put through a bill called Hospital Cost Containment, a very complicated bill. I did not endear myself to the hospitals. There was a nun that ran St. Joseph's Hospital up in Bangor. She used to be nice to me. I don't think she liked me after that. It was a very complicated bill. In fact, I rarely spoke at length about it unless this guy, Frank McKenty, was there, who drafted. He now has one of the top jobs at Blue Cross. Very able, very smart. But my theme was, we basically, and I said this to the legislature, we're saying to the medical community, charge whatever you want. We'll pay half the bill. That's about what we're saying, particularly to the hospitals. And it's still out of control. You know, right now, 18% of our gross national product goes into medical care. And it's on a trajectory to go to about 25%. And so we'll get down to either in the hospital being taken care of, or we're taking care of somebody who can't do it. And we're spending about twice as much as any other country, and our outcomes aren't any better, if as good. I mean, hospital costs are crazy. They're crazy right now, and we've got to rein them in. But you couldn't rein them in when there was no incentive. There is a little more, and I guess the last year or so it's been a little better in regard to the growth of medical expenditures. But 18% is a lot, you know, and it's just, you know, look at a hospital bill if you can understand it. They're very difficult, and look at the price of pharmaceuticals is incredible. I was taking some pills for a breathing thing, and I'd get them for 3 months. And if I didn't have insurance, it'd be like $1,200. How many people can pay that? I happen to have good insurance between Medicare, and I had enough years with the federal government that I have health insurance for them. But hospital, and that's an issue that still has to be addressed. But the Congress of the United States, frankly, is intimidated by the medical community and a few other communities, the gun community, and a few others. I won't get into it, but there are.
But they've got good health care.
Well, it's Blue Cross, Blue Shield, and it's good. I have
Congress
it
seems to take care of itself.
Absolutely. Well, as I'd like to say, a couple of our people that represent us have problems with the minimum wage, you know, going to $10 an hour. They get $175,000, and they don't work as hard as a lot of people earning the minimum wage. A lot of people doing the humblest jobs work the hardest, but they don't feel that's any problem for it. They're $175 plus the benefits, which is a lot more over the long run. But they're kind of concerned that if you pay poor people $10 an hour, the world will fall apart. It's nuts.
Plus the automatic pay raises that they don't have to vote on.
Yeah, I don't think they've got a lot lately. I think when I was in Congress, it may have paid $90,000, but they were up to $174. But I don't think they've gotten them lately. They may have. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense, except it's a little hypocritical that they're worried about the world falling apart if someone got $10 an hour.
You supported a balanced budget constitutional amendment?
I do. I kind of believe that you shouldn't spend more than you take in. I understand you have to do some borrowing. In Maine, you borrow with bond issues that are approved by the public. Not only that, I support term limits. I say send these people back to the farm or their law office or their real estate office. And my best example of that is Mike Dukakis, who I like, very smart, very able, served as governor of Massachusetts. And he did things that may not have been popular, and he was defeated for re-election. He spent 4 years in the wilderness at a university teaching and so forth. He came back and got re-elected, and he did so well. He was 20 points up on his opponent for the presidency in August before the election. Obviously, it didn't turn out right. But he had a chance to think about things, and many of us would like to do how we might have handled something differently, you know. The best I've read about that is one of the poem by Frost, I think The Death of the Hired Man. And the arguments, there's a line or two in there dealing with, the arguments you might have made an hour after the time to give the argument was. Lawyers always say their best argument is when they're driving home after they've argued the case to the jury. Well, with term limits, I don't think people should, we have term limits, 4 terms here in Maine, then they run for the Senate. I think Johnny Martin, I don't think his career was stopped hardly at all by it. You could run for county commissioner. I respect people that run for office. In fact, I'm afraid that a lot of people that are very capable aren't going to run right now because people are beaten up so badly through the internet and Twitter and the rest of this stuff, sometimes absolutely recklessly and irresponsible. But I think it's nice to be there, do it. It's like being on the playing field, that's great. But it's nice to be up in the stands for a while, watch the game, then get back on the playing field. So I'm for term limits. My party hasn't, they're kind of angry at me when I said I support it. But I think it's a good thing. And we have term limits for the governor, 2 terms. We have term limits for the presidency. We ought to have term limits for these people in Washington. It's something I cannot put up with any longer.
I've got on my list here the role of government in economic development. What was your philosophy regarding the proper role of government in economic development? And we've touched on this, I think, to some extent.
Well, I think an outstanding example is FAME, the Finance Authority of Maine, to make some financing available that they may not have been able to get through the regular channels. But government, has a role in education, a big role. It's government that raises the money, whether it's local or state, and you need an educated workforce or a trained workforce. Clearly, government has a tremendous role, in regard to economic development. And I think over the years, Ed Muskie, I think he may have helped create the Maine Guarantee Authority, which, has been abolished, but really consolidated into FAME. I think that was one of the arguments that they used to give for his reelection.
Let's whiz back to you're in the Blaine house, you're recently divorced, you've got 2 small kids. Can you talk about that, what life was like for you?
Well, it's kind of nice. I didn't have to prepare meals. I didn't have to do much of anything, which I'm very good at. And my kids enjoyed it, my son particularly. And both of them would fly with me once in a while when I was going out and speaking. My daughter didn't mind marching in parades with me. She was about 10 years old, maybe a little older, she would have done that. But I think it was a good experience. And the people that really run the Blaine House are very kind and very nice to them. They could not have been nicer. So I think it was a good experience, really.
And the ages back then, they were 8, 9, 10, 11?
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah, they, one was born in 69, I think the other in 71. And I got elected governor in 78. They were 10, 11, 12 years old, yeah. 10 or 11. And my son used to, like boys, the troopers, their guns, their cars, the job they did, and they were very nice to my son.
And were the kids in school up in Augusta as well?
No, they went to school in New Jersey, but they were in Augusta all summers and vacations.
Gotcha. Well, let's talk about your time in Congress. How did you win election over whom, and what was being in Congress like?
Well, it's an interesting experience. You get exposed to a lot of things. It's special. You think of the people that have been there. Abraham Lincoln was there a term or so. So many people. And actually, to be president, you have to at least run for Congress and lose. Obama ran for Congress and lost. Young Bush ran for Congress and lost. Clinton ran for Congress and lost. It's kind of weird. They're probably better off because they lost. Obviously, they've had great careers since. And it's good. I mean, you learn a lot. People that come to testify before your committee, they're prepared. You know, it's a big moment for them. But in my opinion, most all the power resides in the presidency. And in the House, if you're in the minority party, you have virtually no power because the Rules Committee determines what bills can even be debated. And those on the Rules Committee are appointed by the Speaker. And they wouldn't be on the Rules Committee very long if they didn't do what the Speaker said. And even friends of mine in the Republican Party, they talked to me, they say, Joe, I can't do much but raise hell about you guys. They were in the minority at that time, and it's kind of true. Now, it's a little different in the Senate. Their rules, even though basically there, if you wanted to get anything done, you had to have 60 votes. Now, they've changed that slightly, or somewhat, on their appointments in the last month or two. But the Congress is a great experience, but, you know, as people say, you're one of 535. 500. Can you imagine being in a room with 535 and getting anything done? And this recent Congress has proved that you can't get anything done.
Were you able to, were there any specific instances of being able to help constituents?
Oh, the constituent work, you can do some good stuff. And sometimes the congressman or senator doesn't even know it, the staff does it. And people are so appreciative. Because what's special about Congress, if they get something and achieve something, you don't have to pay. You know, it's like you hire a lawyer, kind of costs money or anything. So a lot of that constituent service is so important. And a lot of times a letter from the congressman does open up different avenues and gives a much more careful response. So that is a big part of it, absolutely. And it's what helps them get reelected. You know, as I said, back when I ran for reelection, 98% that sought reelection that year got reelected. And we've seen it in Maine. Very rare that a congressman is turned out. Happens once in a while, but very rare.
Maritime Commission, what is it? And I've read about it a little bit, and
when you get to understand it, tell me about it.
yeah,
no,
I
they
can't say that
regulate shipping in and out of the country, not within the country, and most of it is those containers, and they don't have a huge. It was bigger at one time. Jack Kennedy's father was on that commission for a couple of years. Bill Hathaway served on that commission prior to me, you know, from Maine. And they had another guy from Maine. It sounds like there was a Maine seat, but it just happened that way. There's not really a Maine seat. But it's, much of their power has shifted to the Maritime Administration and the Department of Transportation. They play a little role in regard to shipping, in regard to cruises, the big cruise ships. But the role is modest, that you've got to get a certificate from them to make sure you have enough insurance coverage and bonds that you purchase, that if someone buys a ticket and the ship doesn't sail, you get your money back. But it's not as big as it was at one time.
was that controversial in any way, protecting the consumer that on a cruise ship? That
Well, it was with me.
I read some article.
I was into the issue. I still feel badly about it. That I don't think they required enough bonding. If a ship, you know, failed to people to get their money back, they just don't. And it's disappointing to me. I tried, raised hell down there all the time about it, but I couldn't get the 3 votes that were necessary to do it. Because, whatever reason, I assume they were all acting in good faith. But a lot of them were much more in touch with lobbying interests than I feel was appropriate. That's my view.
So a cruise ship doesn't sail, and I've paid my $1,100 or $2,300, and okay, so now I'm out that money. Is that?
Well, you'd be out a good portion of it. You shouldn't be, because I think the law required that there'd be adequate coverage, and I interpreted adequate to mean that everybody gets their money back. You'd get something, but...
What a radical idea.
Oh, well, and the Congress is right. They passed a good law. But like a lot of times, they can pass good laws, but if the administrative agencies aren't carrying them out, they're not effective. That was mine. We haven't had a situation where they didn't get paid, at least recently, when something happened with the ship. It's going to happen, though. It's going to happen, and I used to give the argument, you're going to be asked to come before the Congress, and I'm going to say, you're not going to be able to explain. The law is clear. You're not doing your job. I wasn't very popular with a couple of the commissioners.
Good. We appreciate
That's
it.
okay.
We appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Let's talk about your legacy as governor.
Legacy.
Is there a legacy? Of course there's a legacy.
I think that will be determined by other people, more objective than me. I actually think...
Let's strike the word legacy and say, in 30 seconds, give me the highlights of your administration. What was accomplished during the Brennan years as governor?
I think we improved the education community in this state. I think we made prisons safer for people in this state. I think that we did a lot of things to help the poor and the challenged in this state. I think we worked to make more resources available for people when state parks and things of that sort. I believe that we helped produce jobs by virtue of the Finance Authority of Maine. I think we helped with situations with heating oil and so forth by trying to give assistance. I think we made it possible for thousands of people to buy that first home that I believe is so important, that they feel they're full-fledged members of the community. But I'm not objective, but these are just some of the things. And I think the quality of a lot of the people we put on the courts as judges are important and were important to a lot. There's a lot of things as I see it now, but I leave it to others who are more objective, that have the time and the interest to scrutinize the record. But we're very proud of the things that we did in state government.
Are there things that, looking back, that you reflect on that you're disappointed you were unable to accomplish?
I'm sure there are, but I don't know what comes to mind right now. But absolutely, there'll be things that will come up, but right now I can't think of them.
Okay. So I think you've seen these questions in advance. Do you have some advice for the next governor?
Well, my key advice for the next governor is, assume it's a new person, to really be careful about putting together the staff and the appointments to run the agencies, because those are so important. It's a little analogous to the running back in a football game. He or she is about as good as the line if they're just not going to run into a stone wall. Very, very important. And I think that for the next governor, take on things that are big, that you're interested in, that you think are in the best interest, and fight for them. I mean, just take them on, and you'll be amazed how many things you might get done. I mean, it's a very exciting job. I think it's the best job in public policy in the United States, except for the presidency. That's obviously a little more challenging and exciting, but the governorship, it's far better than being in Congress or the Senate, Attorney General, the legislature, a lot of these other things. And you can make any issue the biggest issue in the state almost overnight. There's power in that office in that sense. The media will cover you, as we see every day here. And Maine is a state kind of a manageable size. I say that in contrast to something like California, with 30 million people and Southern California or not. I mean, in New York City and upstate New York, they're like two different states. Maine is so manageable, 1.3 million people. And Maine is a state that, it's pretty civilized. People are reasonable. There are not a lot of people that are kind of nutcases, dealing with government. And it's just a fun job. I'd say whoever gets to be elected, if there's a new one, they're lucky. They're going to be in the most exciting job they'll have in their life.
How did it change your life?
Well, I used to say people return my phone calls. I don't know about now. How did it change my life? Psychologically, it was good. You start from the humblest possible beginnings, except another person as governor had humbler ones, I'd say. But I got a lot of satisfaction. I think it was important for my family. I think it was important for people in my community where I grew up to see that you can move ahead without having any special qualifications, just working at it and not be afraid to take risk, not be afraid to fail. Take it. You're never going to get elected if you don't run, if you think you've got a message. So I guess it's changed my life, and I've been exposed to a lot of terrific people. It's a tremendous ongoing education. It's really an exciting job. I'm surprised more people don't seek it. And there are a lot of people who are extremely able that I've met in the course of my work in government that don't run. I wish they would. In both parties. I've met some CEOs. I think of one I was dealing with out in Iowa or whatever. He seemed so able and so competent and so decisive and could make decisions. I wish we'd get more people interested. Something's crazy when 98% of the members of the House get reelected, when you have a Congress right now that only have 7% approval. We need more people energetic in government. And right now, once people get elected, particularly in the Congress, it's kind of a lifetime appointment if they want it.